Grisly Tales for Gruesome Kids, The Me Monsters by Jamie Ricks. Today's story is The Apostrophic Expositor. Now, before I read today's story, try and make sense of this following essay and see if you can make sense of it. My name is B.S. Brogan. I was born under the mark of a broken typewriter and a 1925 front-stroke Megasaccharine grasshopper in the basement room underneath the typewriter repair shop where my grandfather worked for 50 years. I was a normal-looking child with a shock of black hair and toes that pointed inwards like a question mark. The doctors bound splints in them until they grew straight. I crawled when I was 1, I walked when I was 2, but I didn't talk until I was 6. My silence caused my parents much worry. The doctors ran tests on me if I was deaf or dumb, but I was neither. I did not want to speak, and therefore I did not, but then I did. Everything I had never said rushed out of my mouth like a waterfall, and when I try to write it down, it comes out of my pen so fast that this is how it looks. No time to stop, no time to pause, just words and words jostling for position on the page. Facts and thoughts and truths competing for space. Silly facts like when I'm not at school or at home, I live in Batty Wood where the goblins keep the man in the moon awake by grinding their teeth. My mummy was already a beauty queen, and my daddy plays dominoes on Saturday night with a horse called Fiddle. At least I think it's a horse, and I think its name's Fiddle because it can't speak, and has never actually told me to my face. Talking of which, I have got a little nose, brown eyes and teeth in my mouth that I'm sure once belonged to an Anne Boleyn, one of Henry VIII's dead wives, who had her head cut off and teeth put into a jar of beetroot pickle, which is where I found them. This essay is entitled A Short History of Me, was written by a 9-year-old boy. His name, as you probably guessed, was B.S. Brogan, and he had a short but rather noisy life, as I'm about to tell you. Having willfully remained silent for the first 6 years of his life, when he did finally speak, words poured out of B.S. Brogan in a torrent of gobbledygook. A typical me monster. His grandfather did not own a typewriter shop and had never mended a 1925 model front-stroke Megasaccharine grasshopper typewriter. It's true that his feet were bent inwards at birth, like a question mark, as if his body was questioning its own existence. But he had never played in Batty Wood. The man in the moon had not complained about noisy goblins, and if his father had ever played dominoes with a horse, he'd kept it a closely guarded secret. As for the teeth, he had seen a pair of wooden teeth in the Tower of London when he was 3, but they weren't Anne Boleyn's, and he certainly didn't find them in a jar of beetroot pickle. They had belonged to a strange blue-eyed monk who had stopped in front of his pushchair outside the bloody tower and smiled, knowingly revealing a mouthful of uneven brown teeth. B.S. Brogan had always remembered the monk because of his shock of bleached blonde hair. Once he had started to speak, B.S. Brogan made up for 6 years of self-imposed silence by talking non-stop. It was as if he had never heard anything quite as beautiful before as his own voice. The day after the words arrived, his worried parents rushed him into the doctor for a checkup. "And your name is?" said the doctor. "My name is B.S. Brogan. Hello, are you a doctor? A medical doctor, I mean. Not a doctor of of philosophy, because I wouldn't ask a doctor of philosophy for what was wrong with me unless I had a problem with my soul, not my shoe soul, my eternal soul. Talking about it of eternal, it's a new perfume for girls and boys. I think although I've never met a boy who wears perfume, not a nice smelling perfume, I've met plenty of boys who wear natural perfume and stink. Is that a stethoscope around your neck? That word sounds a lot like bathoscope, which is what men dive to the bottom of the ocean in. But why would a doctor need one of those unless he wanted to dive into my blood and look for a giant squid? This splurge of nonsense would have continued all day had the doctor not stopped it by inserting a lollipop into B.S. Brogan's gob. "My goodness," he exclaimed after, as the noise was plugged. "He does like to talk, doesn't he?" "He doesn't know when to stop," said his mother. "His constant drivel is driving us nuts," added his father. "Is there nothing you can't do?" Nothing at all," said the doctor. "It has to get worse before it can get better." This perked up B.S. Brogan's mother no end. "So it will get better?" "Oh yes," said the doctor, "when it dies. I don't think you've fully grasped what's happened. In those early years, when he refused to speak, his brain was filling up with the words he wasn't using. It swelled and swelled until eventually it exploded." "His brain has exploded!" gasped his mother. "Like a huge roaring river bursting its banks," laughed the doctor. "All those years are just swimming around inside his head, like dead cows on a floodplain." For the next 3 years, the blubberfest of bilge that poured from their son's mouth drove Mr. and Mrs. Brogan crazy. It was like living with a steam train in the sitting room. Chatterbox, 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 choo! The noise went on day and night, depriving not just B.S. Brogan's parents of sleep, but their neighbours too. Before long, people started moving out of the area. Even the rats relocated to a sewer in Birmingham. Then, one Tuesday morning, when B.S. Brogan was 9, Mrs. Brogan suddenly slapped her hands over her ears and screamed, "Stop!" Sensing that his wife had reached the end of her tether, Mr. Brogan suggested a trip to the zoo, hoping that the outdoors might lessen the noise. All it did was lessen the population of the zoo. By the lunchtime, B.S. Brogan, witless chatter, had bored the minor birds to death, caused 3 Japanese snapping turtles to commit harakiri on their sunning stones, and reduced the number of lemmings in the world by 350,000. "My, that went well," mocked Mrs. Brogan after the family had been escorted off the premises. "No, it did not," said B.S. Brogan. "If you hadn't scared all the animals to death with your miserable face, they might have let us stay." With 9 came a new problem. The words still poured out of his mouth, but now, when he didn't have anything nice to say, B.S. Brogan would say something nasty instead. At school, nobody wanted to sit next to him. This was not just because he talked through every lesson, but also because his rudeness meant the teacher always had her eye on him. "Kumquats are delicious if you marinate them in milk and sprinkle a sprig of rosemary on top. I got that from a recipe book I'm writing called Milky Kumquat Recipes by B.S. Brogan. That's me. You see, but you probably already knew that, because there's a big clue every morning when our form teacher, Miss Tiddly Push, her at the front with the big fat arms and the big black moustache like a Mexican footballer, takes the register every morning, and I'm the boy who puts up his hand when she calls out the name B.S. Brogan. "What did you say?" gasped Miss Tiddlypush, hiding her top lip with a board wipe. "I do not have a big black moustache like a Mexican footballer." She moved him into a desk on his own, but it made no difference. He carried on chatting whether people were listening or not. "When I was 7, I had a monkey with a big black moustache. It was a chinchilla called Caroline, which is an incredible coincidence because Miss Tiddlypush is called Caroline too, as well as looking like a monkey with a beard. Oh, look, everyone, that's gross. That new girl Fatima's picking her nose. Oh, save some room for lunch, Fatima." When Fatima cried, B.S. Brogan was moved into the corridor outside the headmistress's office, where he carried on talking to the wall. From there, he was moved into the office itself, where the headmistress gave him a talking to. Unfortunately, her talking to was not as loud or as long as the talking to that B.S. Brogan gave her. And 4 hours later, he emerged from her office, the victor. When the headmistress resigned, citing as her reason exhaustion from listening to B.S. Brogan's tripe talk, the school governors decided that B.S. Brogan had a nasty case of me at the centre of the tension of the universe syndrome, which manifested itself in verbal diarrhea and a fear of listening to other people, to anyone else's voice. They asked the school nurse to cure him, but after 4 days of treatment, she was baffled. I can find no explanation for this boy's extraordinary ability to breathe in and keep talking at the same time, she told the governors. Other than this, he's a fish. He's got gills behind his ears to let the air in. But no gills were found. In despair, the teachers resorted to gags. Thick strips of calico were wound around B.S. Brogan's mouth and secured with gaffer tape to prevent his tongue from moving. But the European Count of Human Rights had a couple of words to say about it, and that gags were banned. Those judges at the European Court of Human Rights are a bunch of irritating busybodies. Only last week they tried to close this hotel down for issues of an incinerator. Can you believe it? I was the victim. That crooked plumber charged me £300 to get those severed toes out. Matters spiraled even further out of control. Unable to learn with B.S. Brogan chatting in the class, children were taken out of school by their parents, until B.S. Brogan was the only pupil left, with nobody to teach. The teachers jumped ship too, until there was just one of them left. She was an old-fashioned lady called Miss Syntax, from the Learning by Rote School of English Grammar. She also happened to be deaf. This deafness meant that she was completely unaffected by his barrage of nasty names and nonsensical twittering. It should have been a marriage made in heaven, but it wasn't. She may not have been able to hear, but Miss Syntax could see perfectly as well. And what she saw when she looked at B.S. Brogan's written work shocked her to the core. B.S. Brogan wrote as he talked, without pauses or hesitation. "No!" she cried, when she first set eyes on a short history of me. "This is not acceptable! If you don't use punctuation, how are you ever going to make yourself understood?" B.S. Brogan caught his breath. "By texting," he said. And with that one cheeky remark, Miss Syntax threw in the towel, and the school closed down. It was a black day for Mr. and Mrs. Brogan. Word of their son's loose tongue had spread fast, and there was not a school in the country prepared to take him on. This meant that Mr. and Mrs. Brogan had to educate him at home. but with only one GCSE and a diploma in four-count management between them, neither felt qualified to do so. They advertised for a home teacher in Asbo Kids Weekly, a magazine that catered for disruptive pupils who had been excluded from school. A week later, they received a reply from an English teacher who called himself the Apostrophic Expositor and claimed to teach the grammar of the eternal pause. His letter came with a glowing reference from his previous employers. To whom it may concern, is so, as brevity is a virtue, use him, Rob Dawn. Mr. and Mrs. Brogan were intrigued and wrote back, asking him to start on Monday. The Apostrophic Expositor arrived with all his worldly belongings at 6 a.m. He was a tall man dressed in a shapeless brown habit of a monk and carried in his hands a small wooden bowl, a tin mug, and a large leather book edged in gold. He removed his hood to reveal his eyes of blue and a shock of dried blonde hair. You must be B.S. Brogan. You must be B.S. Brogan's new teacher, beamed Mr. Brogan. Do come in, my son's still in bed. Are you hungry? Asked Mrs. Brogan. Would you like some breakfast? The stranger did not reply. He simply stood in the hall and waited. Mr. and Mrs. Brogan were unsure what he wanted from them. Can you speak? Mr. Brogan asked tentatively. I do speak, he whispered. But I say only things once. Therefore, I must choose my words carefully. I see. Mr. Brogan coughed lightly. Perhaps you could explain what is meant by the grammar of eternal pause. When you pause eternally, you are dead. And when you are dead, you are silent, said the monk, sitting down on the carpet in front of the door. I believe that silence is a virtue. Here, shall I wait my pupil's arrival? His lesson shall start the moment he arrives. Is there anything we can bring you while you are waiting? Asked Mrs. Brogan. The Apostrophic Expositor held out his tin mug. Some cold water, he said, a sheet of white paper and pencil. 15 minutes later, B.S. Brogan arrived downstairs in a flurry of withering words. I was told you were the only teacher in the world who could teach me, but they didn't tell me that you had hair the colour of dog sick. If I gave you something to unlock a door, do you know what that would make you ill? Give you a clue. It's got a red bottom, and you've got a red bottom from being rubbed, and all that time by the itchy potato sack thing you're wearing. Do you give up? You'd be a monkey, a monk key. Don't smile if you don't want there's no law that says you have to have a sense of humor, but you should be careful because people might think you're a chicken because chickens don't smile either, and they might accidentally wring your neck. Don't I know you from somewhere? Your brown teeth rings a bell. Poor someone's dropped a ripe one. Ding dong dell. Who made that smell? Binky bonky binky whoever did that stinky. I bet it's you, sneaking one out through your potato sack because you look like a dirty old tram. He would have continued forever had the Apostrophic Expositor not held up his hand in the shape of a swan's beak and closed it by touching the tip of his thumb. With the tip of his middle finger, B.S. Brogan closed his mouth. As he did so, and for the first time in 3.5 years, stopped talking. B.S. Brogan, said the monk, You have come to a crossroads. One path leads to a life worth living, the other to a future that is no future. For the sake of the world, peace, you must learn when to stop. If you never draw a breath, you will never make sense. You breathe, or you will suffocate with words. Pause or be paused. Let us begin our first lesson. The boy blinked, as if caught in a trance, and then sat down opposite the ascetic, who pushed the pencil and paper across the floor towards him. Punctuate this sentence, then write it down 100 times, he said. B.S. Brogan picked up a piece of paper and stared at the monk, at what the monk had written. That is not, that it is. Then he screwed up the piece of paper and threw it over his shoulder. No, he said, go shove your head in a beetroot boiler. Who needs grammar anyway? Only fussy old women like you in your baggy brown dress, with nothing better to do than stick your nose in where it's not wanted. I don't do punctuation. It stops the words, and the words must flow. If you can't say something nice, whispered the Apostrophic Expositor, best to say nothing at all. Are you threatening me? He bristled the boy. Are you trying to tell me what I can and can't say? I am warning you, said the monk. The only time I've ever been scared in my life was when I had a sore throat and I thought I was going to lose my voice. But you're just a teacher, and teachers don't scare me. If a teacher has nobody to teach, there's not a teacher. So I'm the powerful one out of the two of us, because if you don't have me as a pupil, you don't exist. Then so be it, murmured the Apostrophic Expositor. You have chosen unwisely. As you will not learn to punctuate for yourself, I shall have to punctuate you. We shall read this book instead. He placed his leather book on the carpet. From the outside, it looked like a illuminated manuscript that a medieval monk might have devoted his life into inscribing. But when thoughtfully modern monk opened the front of the pages, were blank. Are you mad? Snorted B.S. Brogan. I knew you were. How can I read something that isn't there? Just say the first thing that comes into your head, said the monk. It shouldn't be hard. After all, it's what you've been doing for the last 3.5 years. Okay, said B.S. Brogan. Okay, and he lined up the nastiest thing he could think of, saying the words in his head were, I don't need punctuation, it's boring and pointless. I'm never going to use it in the whole of my life, so leave me alone or I'll kick you up the colon. But the words that came out were quite different, as if an unseen hand was dragging them from his mouth, and the words actually uttered were, these are the last words of B.S. Brogan. I want them to be written down as a detriment to other chatty children who don't know when to stop. Saying them pulled him up short. That's not right, he faltered. That wasn't what I wanted to say. The choice is no longer yours, smiled the Apostrophic Expositor. From now on, the book is in charge of your words. Behold. The book had sucked in B.S. Brogan's words and arranged them at the top of the first page. But they're punctuated, he cried. All the better for understanding, said the monk. Now hang on a minute, yelled the boy. I thought last words were for people who were going to die. We're all going to die, smiled the monk, flashing his wooden teeth. Some of us sooner than others. A monk after my own heart. In that case, I don't want these to be my last words, yelled the boy. Nobody ever does, said the monk. As B.S. Brogan's second, third, and fourth sentences appeared on the pages, alongside the first. For 3 days the book filled up with B.S. Brogan's last words, as he protested against the monk's evil magic, as he wailed for this cruel torture to stop, as he begged to remain in control of his tongue. The book recorded it all, and it extracted the words from his head and rearranged them into clear sentences on the page. When he tried, when he was tired and his eyelids closed, the monk woke him up by splashing him with the cold water from his mug. On the morning of the 4th day, the flow of words started to taper off. By tea time, B.S. Brogan had so little left to say that he was taking breaths between sentences, pausing to allow the meaning of the words to come out. But by then, it was too late. For by then, B.S. Brogan had run out of words he didn't yet know. But inside his head, there were only 2 words left. The end, he announced, suddenly, taking himself by surprise. Then there was silence. Is that his punishment? Mr. and Mrs. Brogan asked, when the Apostrophic Expositor fetched them into the hall to see the positive change in their son. Is he to be mute for the rest of his life? Not at all, said the monk. I shall make far better use of him than that. As he kissed the cover of the book, B.S. Brogan felt a sharp pain in his stomach. Seconds later, his belly button blew out like a champagne cork. Though the raw, ragged hole, his intestines exploded into the hall. Mile after mile of red gore unravelled from inside him. His body collapsed as its stuffing was extracted. It shriveled and turned inside out of his legs. Chest, hands, and arms were sucked into the book until all that was left was a tiny, round, black-haired head. Then, even that was gone, sucked onto the page, stuck permanently to the paper, just after the D of end. B.S. Brogan's life had literally come to a full stop. As the old saying goes, that is that is not that it is. And that is not is B.S. Brogan. And that's the end of that.